When it comes to storing food long term, you should be stockpiling it now while you still have choices and prices haven't gotten completely out of control. But how do you decide what food to stockpile? Where do you start? Listen to learn how to narrow it down. Hi, I'm the Urban Lady Prepper. I help single moms and solo women with practical emergency preparedness. But of course, all are welcome to be better prepared for whatever happens next. When it comes to food storage, the emphasis should be on stockpiling it while you still have choices and prices haven't gone completely crazy. I've always been a strong advocate for growing your own food, and the sooner you get into it, the better. But for this episode, I wanted to give you a guide on storing food that you'll actually eat for the long term that you can get right now. And I mean like right now. If you've been following me in any capacity, I assume you've decided that emergency preparedness is something you want to get on board with. Maybe you've started grabbing extra items here and there. You've been building up a cache of water. You've been gathering bug-out items, creating an emergency plan, and paying more attention to the weather. And that's awesome. I'm excited that you're making that kind of effort. However, the most essential item when prepping is deciding and budgeting for the type of food you want to stockpile and grow. Even if you are growing stuff, you still want to have plenty of food that's already made, such as canned fruits and vegetables, and staples you can store for the long haul. If you watch other prepper media, they often stress growing and storing things such as onions, potatoes, rice, and beans. If you're new to prepping and not into any of those, or you're unsure of where to start, this episode is for you. As I've mentioned in my other articles and podcasts, it's important to know whatever you choose to store long term is food you're actually going to eat. I want to suggest a tiered list that will help you narrow down what to get first and how to stockpile it. You may be dismissive and think that if you're hungry enough, you'll eat whatever you've got or what is given to you. But it's important that we choose and store what we love while we can and while it's affordable. Yes, I've advocated for expanding our palates to include food we don't often eat or don't particularly care for. However, I'm a big fan of prioritizing what you love. Any sort of long-term emergency escape plan or doomsday scenario requires something that food and water, even if you have plenty of it, can't boost on its own, and that's morale. I've addressed food fatigue and how it's a hashtag first world problem. We've been used to having a certain amount of variety, and we're used to feeling a certain way about eating the same things over and over. If you struggle financially, and we've all been there at some point, there have been periods when we've had to eat the same thing repeatedly for days, if we were fortunate enough to have food to eat. For those of you fortunate enough not to have experienced food insecurity in your lives, please understand that many people, yes, even in the U.S., go hungry. And in lean times, especially if you're a single mom or solo female transitioning to single life, you have to handle all the expenses such as rent, utilities, and food. And there are some hard choices to be made, and the first thing that generally gets affected is food. In one of my earliest blogs and podcast episodes, I mentioned that when I first got married, we struggled financially. I got good in the kitchen because I had to. I learned how to properly cook a big cut of meat and make it interesting enough to last 2 weeks until we got paid again. I'm sure we weren't the only couple having to do that. Having lived through it, my food choices are now simpler. I can easily go a few days eating the same thing. But I understand that there are those of us out there who would become depressed if they had to have turkey 5 nights straight or eat the same chicken dish again as leftovers. Now, I'm not here to shame people for having those feelings because that's our culture. I'm not pretending that folks who can go stretches of eating the same thing are better than those who are fortunate enough to have more choices. What I am doing is acknowledging that, especially as Americans, food fatigue has been more beneficial to the food industry than it is to our actual health and wallets. As you evolve as a prepper, you want to be able to balance what you love to eat with what will be practical to store long term to stave off any feelings of deprivation for as long as possible. I recently had a discussion with my mom, who understands my need for prepping and is very patient as I explain why I do certain things. She has accepted the boring prepping things I sent her with a smile, such as a power station and a NOAA radio. But she understands that future food scarcity will happen, so she definitely wants to stockpile and grow more food. We've already began discussing what we'll stash and grow together and how we'll organize the garden. I'm going to share some of the information from those conversations that will show you how to stockpile in stages, starting with what you love as a great place to begin. Earlier, I mentioned prepper favorites, and all of those are excellent staples. And I do agree they're great to have. But I'm going to be blasphemous right out of the gate. Neither of us gives a crap about a potato. We're not big potato people. Never were. We're rice and pasta people. I'd rather eat bread than eat a potato in any form. I might have some fries on a rare occasion, and I despise sweet potatoes unless they're in a pie. There will be some preppers out there who will clutch their pearls because potatoes are earth gold. I don't argue that point at all. Potatoes are a wonderful food and relatively easy to grow. But just as I don't waste money now buying a bag of potatoes in the supermarket because they'll turn into sprout muffins before I finish them, I won't spend money in precious garden space to grow something I will rarely eat. I would rather store extra tubs of rice and flour for bread than spend extra money and resources growing potatoes, except in a grow bag or two. My point here, before I make the potato lovers upset, is that I'm not going to make them a staple of mine. Same thing for onions. It's worth it for us to buy a number 10 can of freeze-dried onions and use the little bit we need for cooking, rather than having something else stored or in the garden that we won't use much of, have to tend to, and make room to keep. On the other hand, we love us some rice. Rice never gets old. White rice, wild rice, fried rice, we don't care, we eat it all. We realize having a rice paddy at whatever property we end up at is not going to happen. So we know we have to adjust our prepper storage to include plenty of tubs of rice. Americans as a whole aren't as crazy about rice as they are about potatoes, but for us, if we want to have rice, we will have to adjust to storing plenty of it because we want to, not because someone else says we should. It will require more money and resources than growing potatoes, but we will die on a hill of rice. I don't care that potatoes are staples that preppers insist I must have. I don't care that they could be used as barter items. I don't care about any of that stuff. I can use that money, time, and space to grow or store something I'll actually want to eat and won't go to waste. And you should too. So don't do the 10 for 10 cans of okra because it seems like a good deal, but you don't like okra. Personally, cooked okra reminds me of snot. Ugh. Spend that money on the BOGO for the canned string beans your kids love. While it might not be a better deal, you'll enjoy it more when it's what you have to eat for days on end. I have mentioned canned meat in other places, and some of you may have been horrified. I'm sure many of you gasped in horror when you watched that episode of Chopped when one of the ingredients was a whole chicken in a can. If it sounds disgusting, trust me, it looked gross and I'm sure it tasted terrible. But not everything in a can is going to be bad, and a lot of it can be good long-term storage as far as protein. Decide what proteins you can't do without and get some canned versions of it. It may not be cheap, but if the thought of having beans for your long-term protein makes you sad, it's worth doing. Having canned meat on hand that's ready to eat will come in handy for any long-term situation. Aside from canned, storing meat through home canning, freeze-drying, or dehydrating are great options. But meat is expensive and definitely not getting any cheaper. And in times of emergency, especially in a long-term disaster scenario, the quality of the food you eat is crucial. The caloric, protein, and mineral content will be important, so this is why another popular prepper staple is beans, although not everyone is a fan. If that's you, when you reach the point where you're satisfied with the amount of favorite stored food, you can then move on to the food you like, then the food you can tolerate, and finally the food you can use for bartering. Beans are a prepper favorite because they're an excellent source of protein. They're easy to grow and store for long periods, and there's a wide variety available. I like beans, and I might have them about once a week or so. There are maybe some of you out there who don't like beans at all and just prefer not to eat them, and it's perfectly understandable. So even if you're not a fan of beans, revisit them and see if they're worth storing some, even if they end up lower on your food preference list. If you don't like beans enough to store a lot of them, you should consider an alternate protein source. Even if you stash a lot of meat and fish, it's a commodity that you might want to vary with other sources of protein just to stretch it out. Food items like mushrooms and jackfruit can be meat substitutes. They don't contain the same amount of protein as meat, but they do have enough that you can have them now and then without detriment to your overall nutrition. If you like tofu, it's a good substitute, as well as other soybean products such as tempeh or seitan. However, storing it in any form for more than a few days requires careful monitoring of moisture. Also, be aware that soybeans contain naturally occurring estrogen, which, depending upon your individual chemistry, may be something you want to limit or avoid. Because I had fibroids, I had to avoid soy. So, if you like soybeans or soybean products and have a similar situation, you may want to do more research or discuss with your doctor whether it's something to include in your diet for now or long term. Nuts are an excellent source of protein. For those of you who love nuts and want to store as much as you can, unfortunately, their shelf life isn't long because of the oils in them and they'll eventually go rancid. Just like brown rice, they don't store well for a long time, so you shouldn't hold nuts longer than a year. Wow, did my brain just go to a bad place? Anyway, when you get them, be sure to rotate them using the FIFO method, first in, first out. They're good to have, especially if you're trying to augment your protein without beans, but understand that they're not a long-term staple and you may have to settle for the powdered version. I use peanut butter powder and it's awesome, so consider having some of that. In an earlier blog, I mentioned that sugar and salt should be staples that you should store long-term, whether you consume a lot or any of either. You'll want sugar for the morale standpoint because you'll be able to make those cookies, pies, and cakes that you used to make or buy. Also, sugar is great for making those jams and jellies if you're home canning. Consider how much sugar you consume and then decide where it should be on your list. This is another item that is increasing in cost, so if you want to make sure you have plenty stockpiled, start getting some now. Salt, even if you don't use it a lot for seasoning, can be also used for food preservation. You've heard of salt curing, pickling, and baking whole proteins in salt. Salt is used for those processes, and before refrigeration, salt was used to store meat and fish long term. We may actually be in a grid down situation where we don't have electricity and can't refrigerate anything. To save any meat you may have, if you have salt, you can cure it and preserve it so that food doesn't go to waste. I've mentioned these two special items since they're not quote-unquote foods on their own, and you can decide their level of priority, but you should have them even if just for bartering for those people who are still strung out on them. Another good morale booster is hard candy and chocolate. Just as tasting a warm baked good will make you feel instantly better, these two items can do the same. Because both are long-lasting when properly stored, they're treats and a quick sugar hit should you need it, and perk up your mood and attitude during a long bug-in situation or a long drive. So think of the hard candy or chocolate that you and your kids like and start getting some to put with your stash, especially chocolate since that will also skyrocket in price due to the tariffs. If you're not into either, clearly that's not something you want to prioritize, but when you're down to the food you can tolerate or barter, it might not be a bad idea to have a bag of hard candy for trade or just give to a kid who could use a quick smile. One item my mom and I instantly agreed we could not do without is coffee. While my coffee habit isn't as hardcore as it used to be, I'm still at about 3 cups a day. My mom usually has a cup per day, but that 1 cup is real important. So my focus is on storing coffee. I have plenty of coffee, and if I have my way, I will always have plenty of it. Coffee is a hard crop to grow, and the coffee business is a very dirty one. Coffee plants can be grown, but understand that, like rice, the conditions need to be ideal. It's not easy, and you won't believe how much you would need to grow to fulfill the amount you normally consume. For these reasons, I realize I need to stockpile what I can. While I love fresh brewed coffee, I realize that I must store instant coffee for long-term use, and instant coffee is a great bartering item. Coffee prices are already skyrocketing, so if you're a coffee person, get it now. If you're a tea person, you're much better off as you can grow a selection of herbs and make tea blends. You can grow chamomile, hibiscus, lemon balm, and other favorites year-round. You can store commercial tea bags for up to 2 years and loose leaf tea for longer if kept in an airtight container. I don't care for tea, so it's low on my list, but if you love it, go ahead and get extra now. This brings me to an option for those who simply cannot grow anything or, for whatever reason, just wants to have specific items like meat, always available when they want it, and that would be freeze-dried food. Several companies offer freeze-dried items, but understand that because of the process, it's not cheap. But if beef, pork, and chicken are must-haves, and you haven't learned home canning, you may want to budget to get the freeze-dried version. There are several servings depending on the size, and if properly stored, they'll last up to 25 years. You could also freeze-dry your own food. The machines are expensive. However, if you make the investment, it gives you the capability to freeze-dry pretty much everything to your taste and make it perfect for long-term storage. You could do this with meat, fruit, or even eggs. You'll find growing your own vegetables is not only incredibly rewarding, but you're not dependent on someone else growing it and selling it to you at ever-increasing prices. If you can't or won't grow those vegetables, you'll have to settle for the canned versions or from companies that sell freeze-dried versions. So decide where veggies are on your list and plan accordingly. Unfortunately, if you're a dairy person, long-term situations and definitely the apocalypse are not going to be fun. Trust me, I'm not looking forward to it. I love butter and cheese. These are two things I don't want to be without, and I'm sure many of us don't want to be without them either. But unless you have a cow or near someone who has one, you're going to need to decide on a long-term dairy option. If the thought of powdered milk gives you instant screw face, I understand completely. But shelf-stable milk has come a long way. You can now get whole milk powder that, when blended, tastes like the fresh stuff. Of course, some brands are better than others. My dad was the guinea pig for a couple of the brands I tried since he still drinks milk like a kid. When I found the brand that impressed him, I stuck with it. I always have powdered milk in the house. I consider that a staple, and I will always have some, so I don't have to worry about a run on the store for milk. Plus, I don't have to worry about buying milk and wondering if it'll go bad before I finish it. I don't waste any. I make what I need because I know what I'll consume and when I need to make more of it. If your family uses a lot of milk, this is a good option and may save you a couple of trips to the store, and you may place it higher on your list than you originally thought. The same for butter. When there was a threat of butter prices spiking, I stocked up during sales. Some of it ended up being canned. Yes, you can home can butter. And the rest of it I just froze and used over time because butter. I sacrificed a lot for my diet, but giving up butter altogether is not one I'm willing to make. So, along with the regular butter sticks, I get a number 10 can of powdered butter now and then, which I can store for up to 25 years. If you're a canner, try canning butter. To me, it tastes like ghee, which I found tasty. As for cheese, you can get it powdered, but like powdered milk, some brands are definitely better than others. So, you may need to try a couple of different brands. It's worth doing and budgeting for it if you cannot live without cheese, so start checking that out now. I hope I gave you some ideas about how to make a tiered list for your food stash, from love to like to meh. This will help you plan, budget, and stockpile as much as possible for emergencies and into the future. What are your favorites? What are your staples? Share them in the comments to help others create their list. Thanks for listening. Until next time, this is the Urban Lady Prepper signing off. I'm sure I've given you some things to think about as you go through the upcoming week. Has this episode resonated with you? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to click the link in the podcast description to get your free Essential Prepper checklist. While there, get one of my cool designs on a shirt, hat, mug, and more at my Redbubble store. Or you can always buy me a coffee or get a Jace case for your emergency medical needs. It helps support what I do, and I really appreciate it. Join me on the socials, especially on YouTube, where I'll be uploading videos for my blogs from urbanladyprepper.com. I appreciate your time with me. Stay safe, stay sharp, and be ready.